The first thing she remembered after running into the dark woods was the sound of her own heartbeat, pounding so violently it seemed to shake the trees themselves. She had left everything behind. The compound, the suffocating rituals, the chants that had once felt like they bound her to a family. Now, in the cold embrace of night, she realized the weight of freedom pressing against her chest. Every step forward was a step away from the shadows that had defined her life for far too long, and yet, she knew that leaving wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Her name was Mara, though the cult had long ago stripped her of any personal identity, renaming her Light of Obedience, and placing her under the unrelenting gaze of a man whose charisma had once seemed divine but now felt monstrous. For years, she had endured a life carefully orchestrated to break her will. Daily humiliations, endless work, threats disguised as lessons, and the subtle terror of knowing that one wrong word could mean isolation or worse. Every day had been survival, every whispered prayer a lifeline. But she had a secret no one suspected. While the cult's leader, Malcolm Crane, reveled in control, she had been quietly recording, documenting, and collecting the proof that one day would bring his empire crashing down. The escape itself had been calculated over months. She had memorized the guard rotations, the weak points in the perimeter fence, the rhythm of the dogs that patrolled the compound's edges. On the night of her flight, she carried nothing but a backpack stuffed with a recorder, a stack of folders, and her own courage. When she finally crossed the threshold into the darkness, leaving the compound's harsh lights behind, she felt a shiver of exhilaration mixed with terror. Every sound, the snapping of twigs, the rustle of leaves, was a potential danger. But the thought of never looking back at that place kept her moving. It took hours to reach the nearest town, her body trembling from hunger, fear, and adrenaline. She knew that even now, Malcolm Crane would be searching, convinced that her loyalty was unbreakable. But Mara had no intention of hiding. She needed someone who could amplify her voice, someone who could turn her meticulously gathered evidence into a story the world would see. That's how she found Liam Harper, a journalist known for his relentless pursuit of truth. She approached him cautiously, her voice steady but laced with urgency, revealing her identity and her mission. At first, he didn't believe her. No one could imagine the depth of control the cult exercised, the sophistication of their manipulation, and the cruelty masked beneath charismatic sermons. But as Mara laid out her folders and played recordings of confessions, instructions for abuse, and financial schemes designed to exploit followers, the skepticism melted away. He could see the pattern of terror and deception, the way she had been watched, groomed, and silenced. This wasn't just a story. It was a revelation. Together, they began building what Mara would later call the Revenge File, a meticulously organized collection of evidence. Audio recordings of Malcolm's sermons filled with veiled threats, transcripts of private meetings where followers were coerced into harmful acts, financial records exposing fraud and exploitation. Each piece was carefully cataloged, each secret painstakingly preserved. Mara's goal wasn't revenge in the way she had sometimes fantasized in the dead hours of the night. There would be no public shaming, no personal attacks. Her revenge was truth. Her revenge was accountability. Days turned into weeks. Mara and Liam met in cafes, rented apartments, and secluded corners of libraries, moving the project forward while evading anyone who might be watching. She trained herself to speak without fear, to narrate experiences that had once made her feel powerless. And as the file grew, so did her confidence. She began to understand that the cult had taken a part of her, yes, but it hadn't broken her entirely. The real power lay in exposing the man who had tried. The day the story went live, Mara felt a strange mixture of triumph and trepidation. Within hours, social media exploded with reactions. News outlets picked up the investigation. Former members came forward, corroborating her claims, sharing their own stories of abuse. Malcolm Crane became a name whispered in disbelief, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority. Mara watched the coverage quietly, knowing that the real impact wasn't measured in clicks or headlines. It was measured in the liberation of those who had been trapped by fear. In the months that followed, Mara continued to work with survivors, helping them tell their stories and ensuring the cult could not rebuild. She never returned to the compound, and she never looked for personal vengeance, but the world she had once been forced to inhabit was now illuminated by the evidence she had risked everything to collect. In the end, her revenge was not destruction, it was revelation. And in that revelation, she found not only justice for herself, but a measure of peace that had been denied to her for far too long. Mara walked through her life now with quiet vigilance, the shadows of the past always at the edge of her vision, but never again holding her captive. Every step, every choice, every word spoken in the service of truth was her reclamation. And in the quiet moments, when the night stretched long and still, she would remember the terror she had endured and smile, knowing that fear no longer ruled her and that one courageous act could ignite a fire capable of bringing even the darkest of secrets into the light. She sometimes thought about the other faces she had left behind in the compound, the ones that hadn't yet found the courage to escape. Names she barely remembered, whispered in stolen conversations in the dark, girls and boys, women and men, all shaped by Crane's manipulations into shadows of themselves. Mara carried their stories with her now, fragments of laughter stolen, moments of pain endured in silence, and the desperate hope that one day someone would see what had been done to them. It was for them that she continued her work, long after the initial exposure of the cult had made headlines. As the months passed, Mara realized that survival wasn't enough. She needed to dismantle the cult's influence completely. She began tracking former members who had gone underground, contacting them discreetly, offering resources and a way out. Some resisted, unable to imagine life outside the structure that had defined them. Others clung to her guidance, slowly learning that the world was larger and more forgiving than Crane had ever allowed them to believe. It was painstaking, incremental work, but each life she touched became a testament to her mission's truth. Liberation was possible. Even when the legal system caught up with Malcolm Crane, charges filed, investigations launched, Mara understood that justice in the courts was only part of the battle. True accountability came from awareness. She collaborated with advocacy groups, spoke at conferences on cult awareness, and worked to ensure that stories like hers didn't fade into obscurity. Every lecture, every interview, every article she contributed to was a thread in a larger tapestry of exposure, a network designed to prevent someone like Crane from ever amassing that kind of power again. But the journey was not without its shadows. Late at night, Mara sometimes woke in a sweat, haunted by memories of being trapped, of hearing the chants echoing through the halls, of faces twisted in coercion. There were moments when the fear clawed back, insidious and uninvited. And yet, she had learned to confront it not with suppression but with acknowledgement. She would play the recordings, review the documents, remind herself of the courage that had carried her into the night and through the forest to freedom. The past was a scar, but scars were evidence of survival. They were proof that she had endured and prevailed. Her relationship with Liam deepened beyond mere partnership. He had become a kind of anchor, a person who reminded her that she did not have to carry the weight of the world alone. Yet she never relied on him to be the hero. She was always the architect of the mission. Together, they perfected the structure of the Revenge File, ensuring it could be updated, preserved, and distributed without relying on a single person's intervention. It became a living document, a beacon for other survivors, a template for exposing wrongdoing in any sphere of power. Eventually, Mara understood that the compound itself, with all its secrets and horrors, had become a symbol, not of the man who ran it, but of the human capacity for endurance and strategy under unimaginable pressure. Her escape was physical, but her true liberation had been mental, an awakening to the realization that no matter how absolute a dictator seemed, there was always a crack, a weak point, a path to the light. She had found that crack, and she had walked through it, carrying not only herself, but the truth that Crane had tried to bury. In time, Mara stopped thinking of her life in terms of before and after the compound. She had woven the experience into a narrative that empowered her, rather than imprisoned her. The fear, the secrecy, the manipulation, they were now tools of awareness, instruments to educate, to prevent, and to guide. People began to approach her not just as a survivor, but as a strategist, a chronicler of the ways control can be exercised and the ways freedom can be reclaimed. There were no grand ceremonies to mark her victory, no fireworks or parades. Her revenge was quiet but relentless, and it moved through the world in waves, through articles, interviews, and the whispered gratitude of those who found courage in her story. Mara's life became a testament to the idea that true power did not lie in domination, but in exposure and action. The cult had taken years of her life, but it had given her the knowledge of resilience, the clarity of purpose, and the tools to ensure that others would never be trapped in silence. And so, she continued, walking through ordinary streets with extraordinary vigilance. A woman whose past had been stolen, but whose present was entirely her own. Every step she took, every file she released, every life she helped reclaim, was a strike against the shadows of that compound. Mara had learned that the ultimate revenge was not in confrontation, but in transformation, in taking the tools of oppression and turning them into instruments of justice. And in that transformation, she discovered the deepest freedom of all, the freedom to wield truth as a weapon and to illuminate the darkest corners of the world with nothing more than courage and conviction. The ripple of Mara's actions extended far beyond what she had ever imagined. Months after the revenge file went public, she began receiving letters, emails, and even anonymous packages from people all over the world. Survivors of other cults, victims of manipulation, those who had been silenced for decades, they were reaching out. Some simply needed to know they were not alone. Others wanted guidance on how to expose their own tormentors safely. Mara realized her mission had grown beyond Crane, beyond the compound, beyond even herself. Her work had become a lifeline for those trapped in invisible cages. She started traveling quietly, never drawing attention, always careful to remain anonymous to those who might be watching. In one coastal city, she met a former follower of a different charismatic leader, a man who had preyed on women under the guise of enlightenment. She helped him compile evidence and connect with legal authorities, watching as a pattern repeated itself: the manipulation, the abuse, the silence. But now, with Mara's guidance, there could be accountability. Everywhere she went, she left a trail of preparation, instructions for evidence preservation, strategies for whistleblowing, and above all, hope that the truth could triumph over fear. Her nights remained restless. Sometimes, Mara dreamed of the compound, not just the rituals and punishments, but the faces of people she had tried to save, the ones she couldn't reach in time. Those dreams fueled her determination. She had escaped once, yes, but she knew many others had not, and she refused to let their stories be buried in the shadows. Each new survivor she helped was a small victory, a reclaiming of the lives Crane had attempted to consume. At the same time, the cult's remnants began to react. Rumors spread that Mara was hunting them, though she never sought confrontation. Yet, small threats arrived in subtle forms: an unfamiliar car parked near her apartment, an envelope slipped under her door with cryptic warnings, a social media message from an account she couldn't trace. She remained calm, methodical. Fear would not be her weapon, it would never touch her. She had learned the language of control, and now she spoke it fluently on her own terms. Every precaution she took was a demonstration that she had mastered what had once mastered her. Working with Liam remained central, though their partnership had evolved into something deeper, built on trust, mutual respect, and the shared recognition of purpose. Together, they began publishing pieces that dissected the psychological methods cults used, exposing the subtle coercion that could trap even the smartest minds. These articles were widely read, shared in classrooms, therapy circles, and advocacy forums. Mara found herself giving interviews for podcasts, appearing on panels about mental health, manipulation, and survival. She spoke not as a victim, but as a strategist, as a survivor who had wielded intelligence, patience, and courage to dismantle a monster from the inside out. One particularly quiet evening, Mara walked through a park near her apartment, watching children play and couples stroll under the soft glow of street lamps. She thought about the contrast, the innocence of these lives and the horrors she had left behind. She thought about the people she had saved and those she had yet to reach. A sense of satisfaction mingled with vigilance. The work would never truly end because the forces of control and manipulation never rested. But for the first time, Mara understood what true freedom felt like, the ability to act without fear, to illuminate the world's darkness, and to transform pain into power for the benefit of others. And then, unexpectedly, she received a tip about a hidden facility, a small enclave operating under the guise of spiritual healing, far from media scrutiny, using techniques she recognized all too well. Mara's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with purpose. She gathered her team, reviewed the protocols, and began planning a careful, surgical exposure. She would not rush. She would not act recklessly. Years of experience had taught her patience. She had learned to observe, to collect, and to strike with precision. This mission was different. It was no longer only about personal justice. It was about dismantling the structures that allowed men like Malcolm Crane to exist unchecked. Mara realized her life had transformed into a series of calculated acts, each one a thread weaving a web of accountability and awareness. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a force, quiet, patient, meticulous, and unstoppable. And in the quiet moments, when she allowed herself to reflect, Mara understood the deeper truth. Revenge was not about retaliation, and justice was not about punishment. The real triumph was illumination. By turning secrets into evidence, fear into courage, and silence into voice, she had created a blueprint for survival and empowerment that would outlast her, that would ripple outward to touch lives she might never even know. The compound had tried to break her, but in the end, it had forged something stronger, a woman capable of wielding truth as a weapon, and a mission so profound that no shadow could ever contain it.